taught physics in 3 different languages, which is quite amazing. And also that she has visited one country for every year that she's been alive, which is also really interesting. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and welcome to Nudibranch Night.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, I'll just turn on the screen sharing. Go full screen. Okay, you should be seeing my full screen now. All good?
It's good, yeah.
Great, thanks. Yes, it was quite interesting listening to your business meeting before this and hearing it mostly focus on all things winged, whether it was bats or owls or eagles. So now I'm going to take you from the realm of the air down into the realm of the ocean, but not very deep. As Elizabeth said, all of the observations that I'm going to share with you tonight are very shallow observations. These aren't scuba diving photos, and all of the photos that you're going to see tonight are my own. As Elizabeth said, I am not a biologist, and neither a marine biologist nor a biologist in any sense. I'm an astrophysicist, but I spend a lot of time in the water, mostly around Vancouver Island, but all around the world. And so, whilst I might not be able to answer every detailed question that you have about nudibranchs, I have a fairly good amateur knowledge, so I will do my best. And as Elizabeth said as well at the beginning, a lot of people don't know what nudibranchs are. They don't know how many species that we have here, and I always find that people are really blown away once they realize what's in the top few meters of our ocean. So as she said, I'm hoping that in some small way I might change your life a little bit by finding out more about these incredible animals. So Elizabeth already confessed that she had no idea what a nudibranch is. And so I'm going to assume that some of you are also in the same boat. So I'm just going to start off by talking very briefly about what a nudibranch is. Well, so first of all, maybe I'll give you the scientific or maybe the Wikipedia style definition. So a nudibranch is an animal that belongs to the order Nudibranchia. And so just to remind you what the Linnaean system looks like here in terms of domain and downwards. So here is where order lies in that tree. So the order Nudibranchia, the nudibranchs are soft-bodied, shell-less marine gastropod mollusks. And as Elizabeth also mentioned in her introduction, this often leads to them being referred to as sea slugs, but this really doesn't do justice to them at all. And we're going to see that these are really very, very beautiful animals. The name nudibranch, or the word nudibranch, comes from the Latin nudus, meaning naked, and branchia, meaning gills. And this is really one of the key defining features of all nudibranchs, is that they all have their breathing apparatus on the outside. So for different species, that manifests in different places. One of the very common place that nudibranchs have their gills is on their bum. So this nudibranch here, we're looking at their backside and this sort of white frilly puff that you can see. That is their so-called branchial plume. So as I say, that is their gill structure. But for other animals, the gills are spread around their whole body. So this other species that you can see here at the top right, the little white frilly structure that is snaking around the whole animal there, those are the gills for that particular species. But in all cases, these nudibranchs always have their gills on the outside. And so this leads us to a bit of a subtlety, which is that it's true that nudibranchs are sea slugs, but not all sea slugs are nudibranchs. And so here is a good example down here on the lower right. So this guy is called a white berthella. And this is a sea slug, but not a nudibranch, because it doesn't have any external gills. You can see its body is really quite smooth. So no branchial plume, no gills around the side. And also you can't see it here, but there is actually a semi-hard shell to this animal. It's just sort of under the main mantle. And the lack of an external shell is another defining feature. So white Berthellas, not a nudibranch, even though it is a sea slug. So, talking about some of the characteristics of nudibranchs as a whole, so yes, they all have these external gills, but one of the other really kind of key defining features and sort of fascinating characteristics is that all nudibranchs are hermaphroditic. So that means that they have both male and female sex organs. And so if you ever see nudibranchs paired up head to tail like this, then it means there's a little bit of nudibranch romance going on. So we've got three different species that we're looking at here. So in the top right, this is a pair of cockerels dorids. Now, it's often difficult to get a sense of size when we're just looking at pictures on a screen. But this particular species is grows to about an inch long. And this is the head end of this one and the tail end of this one. And they always have their sex organs on the right-hand side of their body. And so that's the side that they lock next to one another. This is a pair of noble sea lemons. So here's the head of one, and there's the branchial plume at the back of the other. So these guys are just kind of getting into position. And then this is a pair of beautiful diamondback tritonias that are really spooning together. So here's the head of one, and then here is the head of the other. So they mate like this, and then they crawl away and they lay their egg ribbons independently. So we're going to see lots of beautiful pictures of nudibranchs tonight, and I am sure that by the end of the presentation, you are going to be raring to go and wanting to go out and find some nudibranchs for yourself. So I wanted to commit a couple of slides to giving you some tips about where you can find nudibranchs. And I'll talk right at the end about some specific locations, but just in general terms, so places that you can go to find nudibranchs without even getting your feet wet. So it's often very easy to find them on docks and floats. So we've got two examples here. So floats and docks, people often don't clean them a lot. So all sorts of good stuff like sponges and tunicates and weeds grow on them. And these are all things that nudibranchs like to eat. So on the left-hand side here, we have a beautiful leopard nudibranch enjoying all of these sponges. And on the right, we have an opalescent nudibranch. So docks and floats, as I said, you don't even need to get your feet wet to take a look at these. And also in just the intertidal rock pools, it's a little bit harder to find them in rock pools, but you certainly can. And I wanted to just give an example here of this great little video that a friend of mine took where she is looking at these lovely opalescent nudibranchs that she is just observing based on sticking her phone into the water of a dock. Now, of course, you have to be very thoughtful before you put your phone into the water. Some phones are waterproof, many are not. So, caveat user in terms of before you do this, but just to give you this sense that you can see these nudibranchs just by poking your head over the side of docks without even having to get your feet wet. But the way that I see most of my nudibranchs is by snorkeling. So Elizabeth alluded to this in her introduction. So yes, the waters here are cold, but believe it or not, when you have the right wetsuit, you can really stay warm for a long time. So I'm a bit of a wimp in the cold water. So I'm the kind of person who, if I go to the swimming pool, if I'm not moving, I'm shivering. But in my wetsuit here, even when the water is only 10 degrees in the wintertime, I stay warm for at least an hour. And in the summertime, it's a piece of cake. So with the right wetsuit here, you can really be in the ocean all year round. So here are a few pictures taken by me, but of one of my snorkel buddies admiring some nudibranchs. So here we have the rope of a buoy, of a sort of a boat buoy. And I don't know how well you can see it in this zoomed out picture, but there are these big sea peaches. So this is a kind of tunicate. So it's a siphon animal that draws water in one valve, filters it for food, and then squirts the rest out. So here is a zoom in of one of these sea peaches. These are about 4 to 5 inches tall, so they're quite big. And down here, there is a beautiful nudibranch hiding amongst the weeds on the surface of this tunicate. So this one is quite small. It's maybe only a centimeter across, so you have to look very carefully to find it. But some of the nudibranchs in our waters are really quite large. So here is one that, as you can see, it's basically the size of my snorkel buddy's head. So it's very, very productive to find nudibranch snorkeling. I basically see them every time I go out. So I have kind of 2 tips on how to find nudibranchs once you're out near the ocean. And the first one is maybe an obvious one. It really goes for everything in nature, is that animals are often found near their food source. And so this again is why docks and floats that don't get cleaned very often are very productive for nudibranch spotting, because they're covered in all sorts of microscopic food sources, different algae and tunicates and bryozoans and things like that. So here again, I've got 2 examples to show you. So here he's very camouflaged, or I should say they, because they're hermaphroditic. Very well camouflaged, this Monterey sea lemon. There's actually a second one here and a third one here, all chowing down on this tasty yellow sponge. And then over here we have a San Diego dorid. So the white with the black spots on, again, enjoying this nice sponge. So particularly when I see big sponges, I tend to take a closer look to see if there's a nudibranch hanging out. And then the other thing that I always pay attention to is that nudibranch egg masses are quite large and quite obvious. And so often I see the egg masses before I actually see the nudibranch. So here are examples of a few different types of egg masses. So in these 4 different photos, in this one in the lower left, you can actually see the nudibranch responsible for laying that particular egg mass here. Very often these egg masses look like beautiful rosettes. Sometimes they look a bit more like spaghetti, but anytime I see something like this, I'm always then looking around to see if I can spot the nudibranch that has laid these eggs. So this set of photos kind of encapsulates those 2 pieces of wisdom. So this species here is called the striped nudibranch. We're going to talk about 25 different species in this presentation. I'm going to sort of talk you through some of the tricks for identification, because many species look quite similar, but this striped nudibranch is very easy to spot. Not going to confuse this with anything else. And obviously the name is as it says on the can, right? So very obvious stripes here. And the striped nudibranch, its favorite food are these orange sea pens. So these are very dramatic. And again, I see these when I'm snorkeling. They look like big orange ostrich feathers that grow on sandy bottoms. Usually they're at least about 5 meters down. So you either have to kind of dive down a little bit, or you see them when the water is clear and you have good visibility to see down that far. But whenever there's a sandy bottom, and whenever I see fields, because these grow in large colonies, these orange sea pens, I'm always on the lookout for these striped nudibranchs, which then tend to patrol in between the orange sea pens and like to guzzle them down. And then here in this lower left, this is one of the egg masses left behind by the nudibranch. And so just as you'll find the nudibranch hanging out by its food source, the nudibranchs also tend to lay their eggs near those same food sources, so that when the babies are born, they have a ready-made meal close by. So a lot of this talk is going to be about species identification. And so as amateur naturalists, I think we all appreciate the value of a good field guide. So I wanted to point you to 3 of my go-to resources for identification of nudibranchs. And I've chosen 3 that sort of sample different volumes of knowledge. So, okay, what do I mean by that? Well, on the left, I expect you all know the name Rick Harbaugh. He's a very well-known local naturalist. So this is a pamphlet. So it's a laminated, it's probably sort of a dozen fold-out sheets that have beautiful color pictures and some basic facts and figures about many of the nudibranchs. So if you're just getting started and you don't want to be overwhelmed with information, then this is a great guide. It's also very cheap. You can pick this up in pretty much any bookstore. Next up is by the same author, Rick Harlow, his classic pocket field guide, Whelks to Whales. Now, this covers not just nudibranchs, of course, as it says on the cover, everything from crustaceans to mammals. I mean, certainly the invertebrates feature very, very heavily in here, but fish as well. So this is a really great pocket field guide. It's got hundreds of species in there, but it is still very digestible. And then on the right-hand side, this is really the Bible for marine wildlife in the Pacific Northwest. So by Andy Lamb and Bernard Hanby. This is an absolute brick. It's probably 2 inches thick. It's hardcover. You pick this thing up and you don't need to go to the gym anymore. It's it's really a very weighty tome, and it has everything in it. So if you are serious about extensive marine identification, then this big green book is going to be your friend. And then there's also, of course, lots of online resources as well. And since I know this is being recorded, I won't read this out. You can come back and look at your leisure at some of these suggestions. But what I will say in terms of species identification is we have 40 plus species in the Pacific Northwest. It's hard to put an exact number on it, not least because there are frequent revisions to the taxonomy of the order. So I'll mention a few cases as we go along where a particular species has been recently recognized as actually being split into 2 or more different species. So this is an active field of research. Okay, so with that, we're going to run through a few of the kind of fan favorite nudibranch species, and also ones that are fairly easy to find, so that if you are inspired by this talk and you want to go out and start looking for nudibranchs, these are some of the ones that you might hope to see. I'm going to use the common names rather than the Latin names. It's easier for everyone to remember them. It's easier for me to pronounce them. But if you're interested in the Latin names, then I can go through some of those as well. Okay, so this beauty is a clown nudibranch, and this, despite how exotic it looks, is actually very common in the Pacific Northwest. I see this very frequently when I go out. This is actually one of those examples that has been, a few years ago, reclassified into 2 subspecies that are actually quite tricky to tell apart. So I'm not going to go down that road. If you're interested, you can ask me at the end. But what I want to point out with these photos is one of the kind of key sort of bodily characteristics of nudibranchs. We already talked about their gills. Now I want to talk about their sensory organs. So these sort of horn-like structures that are at its head, we can see them really clearly here. This one that's facing to us. These are called the rhinophores. So the rhinophores really taste the water to detect chemical signatures, either of food or of other animals nearby. So, if they're looking for a mate, for example. And so I don't know how well you see it, but they have a very high surface area because they're frilled, they're sort of organized in layers. So again, to taste the maximum amount of water passing over them. And the gills on this guy, these are not right on the bum, they are in the midsection here. So this is the gills on the clown nudibranch. Next up is the Nanaimo-dorid. So the Nanaimo-dorid is again an extremely common one. And one of the sort of interesting observations that I've made is that almost every time I see a Nanaimo-dorid, it is with a buddy. So, I mentioned that all nudibranchs are hermaphroditic. And so for any given species, I will sometimes see them docked up, right side to right side. But Nanaimos are almost always together. They just seem to be extremely social. Even if they're not mating, they're kind of cuddled up to another one. And not, very often they seem to be chasing one another like this, kind of head to tail. Now, because these are colloquially sea slugs, they are not moving very quickly. So usually I just get one view and then I've moved on. But they're often cuddled up like this. Nanaimo are fairly easy to distinguish. They're typically about an inch long. They are predominantly white, but both their branchial plume, so remember that's their little like bum gills, and their rhinophores, their sensory organs on their heads, are both tipped with sort of a dark maroon, sort of brownish color, and they're the only nudibranchs that have this coloration. I don't know how well you see it in these pictures, but they also are covered. Their bodies are covered with this sort of hair-like structure that in this species have bright yellow tips. And so these bumps or hair-like structure on the body are called tubercles, and we're going to come back to tubercles later. So almost every time you see an anemodorid, they're going to look exactly like this, but very, very rarely you see this color morph in a much darker variation. So here is an example here. So it still has the maroon tips around the branchial plume, and it still has the yellow tips on the tubercles, but the body is much darker. But this is maybe like 1 in 50 is like this. Almost all the time they are white. Okay, another common one, you've already seen this one pictured on one of my earlier shots. This is a leopard dorid. So I think the name has a fairly obvious origin. This nudibranch, again, usually 1 to 2 inches long, has these very leopard-like spots to it, and now familiar features that you've heard me talk about, so the branchial plume at the back and the rhinophores. But this lower right photo gives me the opportunity to show you that in some species, and this is one of them, they can actually retract that branchial plume if they feel threatened. So this one you can see it's sucked its branchial plume in, and they can also do the same with their rhinophores. So if they want to kind of maximally retreat from predators, they can retract some of these external features. And once again, you can see that there is a pair of them here. So leopard dorids, again, quite common. And here is going to be my first example of 2 species that are quite easy to confuse. So whereas the clown nudibranchs, very easy to spot, and the nanaimo are very characteristic as well, this leopard dorid looks an awful lot like this one. So this is the San Diego dorid. So they're both white, they both have black spots. How to tell the difference? So the secret is mostly in the spots. So let me just go back to the leopard dorid. So the leopard dorid has many, many spots all over its body, and they can reach all the way down to the bottom of the main body that we call the mantle. Whereas the San Diego dorid has far fewer spots, and they tend to be just in 2 lateral lines down the back of the body, with one right in the middle of the forehead. So that distribution of spots is very different. And then the other thing that is different, and again, it's all in the spots, is that the San Diego dorid, its spots are hollow. So they're more like rings, right? You can see this hollow center to these rings, whereas the leopards, they're sometimes fainter in the middle, but they're always filled in. So that's how you can tell the difference between the leopard dorid, which is generally much more common, and the San Diego dorid. Okay, which brings me to a very tricky threesome and a kind of a personal pet peeve of mine. So when I go out with snorkeling buddies, it's very common for them to wave me over and say, "Sara, I found a nudibranch," and I will say, "Which one?" And they will say, "The yellow one." Okay, so there are at least 3 quite common yellow nudibranchs, and people just tend to colloquially refer to all of them as a sea lemon. And so I am going to educate you all as to how to tell the difference between these 3 yellow nudibranchs and which one of them actually has technically the name of the sea lemon. So these three photos are three different species, and so we're going to learn how to tell them apart. Okay, the first one is the Monterey Dorrit. Now, this is by far the most common of the three. It is, once you know how, easy to identify. So again, these are typically between about 1 and 3 inches. They can get bigger, but that's the kind of the typical size you'll see. Yellow all over, with the exception of those tubercle features that I mentioned. So the bumps on its back, they are sometimes tipped in a darker brown or even a black color. So anytime you see these kind of dirty tubercles, these brown tubercles, then you know you have a Monterey Dorrit on your hands. On the other hand, the noble sea lemon, and this is the only one that really has sea lemon in its common name. It also has some dark patches on it, but it's not the tubercles themselves that are dark. It is the body underneath them. So you can see again the tubercles, okay, those bumps all over the body. There's the branchial plume now that we know and love. But you can see the brown patches are on the sort of the smooth base of the body and not on the bumps. Now, sometimes they don't have very much brown on them at all. Sometimes there's a lot of brown, but the brown is never on the actual tubercles. And then the third type, which is probably the least common and also the trickiest one to identify, is the Heath's Dorrit. So, okay, it also looks like it's got bits of brown on it, but these are tiny freckles on the main part of the body. So it's not on the tubercles and it's not extended patches like we saw with the sea lemon, but just these tiny freckles. And the Heath's Dorrit is usually yellow, but it can sometimes be white as well, which can be confusing. And the other kind of characteristic that I tend to notice with the Heath's Dorrit is that the edges of it tends to look a bit sort of flat and raggedy, whereas the noble sea lemon is much more domed. But this is something that you've got to have a bit more of a practiced eye to see. So if we go back then to this compilation of three, we can see this one on the right. It has those dirty brown tubercles. So that's our Monterey. The one on the top left, you can self-test here. We've got these little brown freckles, but on the main body. So that's our Heaths. And then here we have a pair of noble sea lemons because we can see the brown is on the main body extended over this patchy area. So in this whole citrus confusion of sea lemons, there is another player because we not only have sea lemons, we also have the orange peel nudibranch. So this one actually looks very different to the various three that I've just shown you. And it was also the example that I had on one of my early slides showing you that the gill structure for this one is this beautiful lacy structure around the edge of the body. So this is the orange peel nudibranch. Fairly, well, I won't say rare, but I know many scuba divers who have never seen one of these. You kind of have to know where to look. And when you know where to look, then you can find them. And I'm going to give you a few more tips on that at the end. So we've had all of these very colorful nudibranchs, bright yellows and oranges. And so you might be thinking, well, this is going to be a piece of cake to go out and find all of these things. Well, it's true that sometimes they are very obvious, but even the very brightly colored ones can be extremely tricky to spot. So this red sponge dorrit, which gets its name because it eats red sponge, is exactly the same color as its food source. And it's also really tiny. It's about the size of my pinky nail. So, I mean, a centimeter at most, but usually more like half a centimeter. And so when it's on top of its food source, as in this main picture here, okay, so here's the outline of it. Here it's two tiny rhinophores that it's drawn in. It's very, very difficult to spot. I usually only see them once they venture away from the sponge and they actually stand out on the rocks. And then we've got some that are even harder to find. So the barnacle dorrit. So this is really, really well camouflaged. They are not only small, but they are colored exactly the same as rocks. So in this lower picture here, there's just one individual, and then there's a whole cluster of them up the top here. And so usually these barnacle dorids, this is a good example of a species where I usually see the eggs before I see the individuals. So here's a picture of some of their egg masses. There are some beautiful shrimps on these, feasting on some of these eggs. But these egg masses can be enormous. So this entire rock, you can see some kelp stipes here for scale. These entire boulders have been covered in the egg masses of these individuals, which, one is only maximum an inch large, but the colonies can be hundreds strong. And so they lay these immense masses of eggs. Okay, so a lot of the nudibranch species that I've talked about so far have been in this dorid family, right? So the red sponge dorid, the barnacle dorid. Dorids tend to be characterized by a fairly uninteresting morphology. So they're domed. They've got these bumps on them, the tubercles, but then they're not too exotic in terms of their shape, even if they're very colorful. So the next family that I'm going to talk about is the aeolid family. So the aeolid family is characterized by having a much kind of frillier body structure. So this is one of the more common aeolid species that I see snorkeling here. It is called the opalescent, or sometimes the long-horned nudibranch. And you can see it has these long, frilly, orange-tipped structures. So those are called serrata. And the serrata have three main purposes. So it is part of the extended digestive tract of the animal. It also helps with the breathing of the animal. They breathe through the serrata, as well as through the branchial gills. But they also use them for defense. So there are certain species that feed on small anemones, and they ingest the stinging cells from the anemones and they store them in the serrata, which, as I just mentioned, are part of their digestive tract. So if a predator comes along and tries to take a nibble out of them, they get a mouthful of these nasty stinging cells. The same is true for this other aeolid species, the orange and white tip, and you can see the same basic structure is here, right? So these long, frilly serrata, and then that dark core is part of the digestive tract as well. So some of the aeolid family look quite different. So this is one that you will very commonly find on docks and floats, not as colorful as some of the others, but again adorned with hundreds of these serrata. So this is the so-called shaggy mouse. It's usually this beautiful pearly white, but sometimes it's a darker gray. And I feel like shaggy mouse is very, very apt name for this particular species, because they really do look like little furry cuties. Maybe even more dramatic in the aeolid family are these other species that have serrata that are less fine, but play the same role as the serrata of the other aeolids that I showed you in terms of a defensive mechanism. So sometimes, even if they're not storing stinging cells, they are playing a complementary role for the defense. So this frosted nudibranch uses its serrata as a decoy mechanism. So if it feels threatened by a predator, it can shed these serrata, sort of leave them wiggling off at the side, whilst the nudibranch kind of scuttles off in the opposite direction, leaving the decoy behind. So this frosted nudibranch, also called the white-line dorona, usually white or ivory in color, but sometimes it comes in this beautiful kind of peachy color, and very rarely in this lovely lilac, but always there is a white rim to the foot and a white rim around all of the serrata. And again, this species is relatively common. I see the white ones around quite a lot. Again, in the spirit of pointing out easy misidentifications, it can be easy to confuse that frosted nudibranch with this one, the golden dorona. So you can see the morphology is quite similar. These long, frilly serrata. The color is even somewhat similar to the peach version of the frosted nudibranch.
Mhm.
But the golden dorina has these little white spots all over its body, and this one is not very common. I maybe see this once or twice a year, so always a treat when I get to see that one.
Wow.
And then just in the last few, I'm going to show you an even kind of frillier set, a different family again, the dendronotids. And here, one of the contrasts I want to draw is that nudibranchs are both very small and very big. So this branch dendronotid is one of the smallest species that I've managed to photograph, just a couple of millimeters long, very, very tricky. It was resting on this seaweed. But even though it's tiny, we can see all of this beautiful structure in its branches.
Mm.
And I contrast that to a couple of animals in the same family, so still dendronotids, but that are really much bigger. So this rufous dendronotid, you can see the similarity in the sense of having all of these branched appendages, but this guy can be 6 to 9 inches long, right? So these are really quite big. And again, you can find these on docks. I've seen plenty of pictures on iNaturalist that people have found these on docks. But then the real kind of giant of the class is the so-called giant nudibranch. The clue is in the name. These guys get up to a foot across. This is the same species that you saw right at the beginning of my presentation with my snorkel buddy's head right next to it. So these giant dendronotids, you tend to find them on very sandy bottoms because if you remember, I said you usually find them where the food sources are. And the favorite food source of the giant nudibranch is this tube-dwelling anemone. So these tube-dwelling anemones, they live in sandy bottoms. And so the giant nudibranch patrols around and then actually pounces. I don't have a picture of it, but they actually rear up on kind of their I can't say hind legs, but hind quarters. And then they pounce down onto the tube-dwelling anemone, which then retracts into its tube and really kind of almost sucks the head of the nudibranch down. And there's this underground battle that goes on between the nudibranch and the tube-dwelling anemone. So, I mean, never say that nature is boring. The alternative common name for the giant nudibranch is the rainbow nudibranch, because even though this is the most common color variety, which is fairly sort of plain and translucent, they also very rarely, maybe 1 in 20, I see in this kind of lovely raspberry tangerine mix, which is always a special treat. And then the other sort of fun fact about not just this species, but several other species, is that they're pretty good swimmers. And so whilst I'm usually looking out for them on hard surfaces, I have to remind myself to always look up when I'm snorkeling at eye level, because they have this beautiful kind of flamenco dance that they do through the water. So here is a couple of them caught dancing in the water.
Mm.
And then the very last species that I just can't not put in because it's a favorite amongst many snorkelers is the hooded nudibranch. These have a completely different body shape to any of the other ones. They're characterized, as the name indicates, by this sort of large hood. It sort of reminds me of a marine Venus flytrap. So here is the kind of the head of one. And these feed by clamping that hood closed. So here is one next to it that is closed. And so they kind of filter feed through the water column by clamping down and then extracting the nutrients that they've caught in their hoods. These are also very adept swimmers. So here's one swimming. These are quite seasonal, so you tend to see them in the late fall, in particular in kelp forests. So in sort of late October, November time, you'll see hundreds of them collecting together on the blades of kelp, getting ready to mate and to lay their eggs. Okay, so now you're all super excited about nudibranchs and you want to go and see them for yourself. So, okay, where are you going to go find these nudibranchs? So my apologies that this comes from the perspective of a Vancouver Islander and not a mainlander. But I have it on good authority that really Vancouver Island is much better for finding nudibranchs than the mainland. So you're just going to have to come over and look for them for yourselves. As Elizabeth mentioned in the introduction, I wrote a book a few years ago, which isn't specifically about nudibranchs, but it's about snorkeling in general. This is a guidebook on what you're going to see, where you can see it, lots of color pictures. And so I'm just sharing a few of the locations from my book that are particularly good for finding nudibranchs. And they're, as I say, all my apologies on Vancouver Island. So right here in downtown Victoria, our great provincial capital, you really don't have to go very far. You don't have to be off in the wilderness to get to see nudibranchs. So this is really just a couple of kilometers from downtown, a place called Clover Point. And this is really a fantastic place to go and spot nudibranchs. I regularly see 6, 8, maybe even 10 species at a time. And so here are some of the examples of some of the species that I see here. The best time to come here is in the fall and the winter, because in the summertime, I find that lots of seaweed tends to cover up the rocks and it's harder to see them. Likewise, just down the road from downtown Victoria is a neighbourhood called Esquimalt. If any of you have been over to Victoria, you've probably crossed the bridge over into Esquimalt. And just down the road from the Navy base is Sax Point Park. And again, this is a great nudibranch hotspot. In particular, I see some of the rarer species here. So this is one I didn't have time to talk about. This is the multicolored dendronotid here. I only see this in a few spots around the city, and this is one of them. Again, fall is best to avoid the summertime vegetation that can hide them all. If you have a hankering to try to see those giant nudibranchs, then one of the best places is in a spot called Maple Bay. This is about an hour's drive from Victoria. It's not great for most species, but it's got this sandy bottom, and that sandy bottom is covered with tube-dwelling anemones, and so there are lots of these giant nudibranchs patrolling around trying to get a tasty meal. And as a bonus, there are some excellent docks in the area. So if you come in the winter, so you want to avoid boat traffic, people just sort of have taken their boats away, then snorkeling around the docks in wintertime, you'll often find extra goodies when you're there. If you fancy taking your chances with BC ferries, then you can venture over to the Gulf Islands. And one of my favorite Gulf Island spots is on Pender Island, a place called Peter Cove. And again, this is not only good in terms of the number of species that I see, but several of the more unusual ones. So in particular, this Rufous dendronotid, which I mentioned a few slides back. This is the only place that I see Rufous dendronotids when I'm snorkeling. And they seem to be seasonal. I usually manage to catch them between kind of September and November. Again, just to point out somewhere that has like one species that is special back in sort of North Victoria is this place called Hollydean Park, and this is a spot where you can go to see these huge fields of orange sea pens. And so because there are many sea pens, then there are many striped nudibranchs around as well. And then the very last one, again, in terms of a specialist destination, I mentioned that many scuba divers have never seen an orange peel nudibranch, but there are several spots in Souk, which is about an hour drive up the west coast from here, where you're pretty much guaranteed to find orange peels. They love strong current environments, so it's an area you have to be vigilant about and sort of check conditions before you head out, but a very rewarding spot. Okay, so with that, I will wrap up. This was really just a small sampling of the nudibranchs in our cold waters, and I would be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was lovely. I must say, I wish I had known about these when I was with my nephews and nieces looking at tidal pools because they
Well,
would
now
have
you
been
know, it's never too
fascinated.
late.
I mean, I was looking at the things with them and not having any clue really what I was looking at, and they were probably there if I
Oh,
just
for
known
sure,
to look.
for sure.
If I just known to look. I think there were a couple of questions here. I mean, some of these comments are from earlier. But oh, Annie Caps was asking, are they edible?
So legend has it that First Nations would eat this orange peel nudibranch. However, what I've heard more recently is that was maybe a misunderstanding. But because it was thought that maybe these were edible, I think some people have tried them. There is a description in in Andy Lamb's book, and he says he found them wanting. So I suspect, I mean, you can probably eat them, but whether they are going to be a tasty meal or not, I suspect the answer is no. So they are not widely used as a food source in the Pacific Northwest, as far as I know.
Okay, Annie was also asking, what's their lifespan?
Yeah, so generally not long, and it depends on the species, but usually less than a year or so.
Hmm. Okay, now Shanti's commenting here saying, awesome photos, Sarah. Thank you for sharing all of this info with us. Now we know all about them.
Hmm. Or at
Now we
least
just
enough to
have,
get you going. For many people, it becomes a lifelong obsession.
yeah, so
I I have a question. You heard us chatting earlier, and we are talking about birds quite a bit because a lot of us in the club are birders, and many of us have a spark bird, like a bird that got us excited about birds and paying attention to birds. Did you have a spark nudie?
Oh, so that's very interesting because I owned like whelks to whales way before I started snorkeling. And so I used to just look at these pictures and think, I would never see it. But what it meant was that when I then did see one for the first time, I sort of already knew all the names. So I remember the first nudibranch that I ever saw, and of course, it was a more common one. It was a Monterey, but I was immensely excited. But I wouldn't say that it was my spark in the sense that I was already excited about, the order in general. But yeah, I mean, I definitely still have my favorites, and it's maybe the same for bird is that often our favorites are the ones that we don't see a lot, right? I mean, you
Right.
see robins every day of the year and chickadees every day of the year, and so you don't get excited about them, even though sometimes the common ones are very beautiful. So I mean, I have a soft spot for the rufous dendronotid because I don't see it a lot, and the golden dorona as well. But I have to remind myself that even the common ones, like the clown nudibranch that I showed you right at the beginning, it's common, but it's absolutely stunning, right? I mean, people see pictures of these and can't believe that they're not tropical. Hard to believe sometimes that we have these incredibly brightly colored species in our own cold waters.
Yeah. I've been excited about them for a long time, but I've yet to actually see one in the ocean.
Mm.
So that's,
Well, as I say, take a look on the undersides of docks and wharfs because they're definitely there. And then beyond that, you have to get yourself a wetsuit.
yep, you're right.
so we should be able to find him here too.
Yes, I mean, I don't see why not.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly. So my observation, I'll maybe just stop screen sharing for a second so I can see everybody. My observations of marine life around the island are such that the west coast of Vancouver Island is much richer in kind of the intertidal than the Strait of Georgia. And I'm not a marine biologist, so I don't know why this is. My speculation is that it's got to do with a few factors. So the outer west coast gets a lot of surge, a lot of pounding by the waves. There's constant fresh nutrients coming in. A lot of these species really like that surf and surge. But I think also it could be to do with the salinity. So all of the
Mm.
runoff that you get from the coastal mountains, my understanding is that that drops the salinity
Yeah.
in the waters in the Strait of Georgia. So it's really it's chalk and cheese in terms of when I go snorkeling, say around Nanaimo, I immediately know that I'm not on the West Coast. It just looks very different. So I imagine kind of the Howe Sound area may well be similar to that. So yes, I'm sure they're around, but they may be less abundant and less diverse than we have here on the outer coast and around Victoria.
Annie Capps has got a comment here saying nudibranchs require a specific stable salinity as they are almost entirely restricted to saltwater environments and are sensitive to rapid osmotic changes. For aquarium purposes, specifically for common species like the Bergia nudibranch, maintaining a stable salinity is critical for their survival.
Well, there you go.
Oh,
Makes sense.
yeah,
So my salinity gambit was
yeah,
maybe not completely incorrect.
you were. Yeah. I didn't know they had those things at the aquarium here, but they do.
Hmm.
A friend of mine,
Got
when
a
I told her,
question. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, I hear you.
yes,
What are their main predators, and are the population stable? Are they growing, shrinking? Are they endangered? What's their sort of ecological status?
So in terms of predators, so there are some fish that eat them. Also crabs will eat them. So this is why they have these defense mechanisms. In terms of our knowledge about population stability, I don't think anybody really has done that study. I can tell you, anecdotally, I've been snorkeling on the West Coast for more than a decade. In any given spot, they come and go sort of almost seasonally, and I don't know where they go. I mean, it's clearly they haven't just completely disappeared. Maybe they go down to deeper waters, for example. But over long time scales, I haven't really seen any obvious cause for concern in terms of decline. Yeah, I see in the channel. Obviously, we don't have. I mean, like butterfly fish and triggerfish. I mean, this is for tropical nudibranchs, but we also have fish species here that eat nudibranchs. But nudibranchs exist the world over. I mean, I have a book that is the Encyclopedia of Nudibranchs, and it's this thick, right? I mean, I don't know how many, but thousands of species. They are in every water, and so yeah. So this comment about like butterfly fish and triggerfish, those are for sort of the more tropical ones. But yes, we have fish here as well that eat, and obviously we don't have sea turtles here either. But so yes, they are like gummies for many predators.
Annie has added here that nudibranchs, despite their often potent chemical defenses and warning colors, are preyed upon by specialized fish, wrasses, butterfly fish, triggerfish, also crabs, sea turtles, and even other carnivorous nudibranchs. They're
Yeah,
also
and
threatened.
that was the comment I was referring to when I was saying,
Yeah.
that a lot of that is with reference to the tropical ones because we clearly don't have sea turtles here.
Yeah.
But yes, to indicate that there's a range of predators around the world.
Yeah, they're also threatened by sea spiders, sea stars, and flatworms. So somebody knows something about nudibranchs. Yeah, Annie.
Sarah, do you take your own photography?
Sorry, say again?
Do you take your own pictures?
Yeah, these are all my own pictures.
What kind of camera do you use?
I wish I'd brought it up because I often get that question. It's a very basic one. It's an Olympus TG6, so it's a little compact point and shoot. I don't do anything fancy with it. I use it on the auto mode. The key is learning how to stay still underwater so that you don't get blurry pictures. But apart from that, it's a very basic camera.
Nice. So there's hope for everybody. That's good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nature has already done all the hard work.
Good.
That was really fascinating.
Very good.
You know, there's a lot about something I'd never even heard of before now.
Well, I'm very happy to have provided that.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Do you have some more comments here, questions? No?
Impressive.
Yeah, very, very good.
Yes.
Very impressive.
You said they don't move very fast, but how fast would they go? Like if it came back an hour later, how far does it move?
Oh yeah, it will have. I actually have a friend who does some time lapse photography. So yeah, I mean, certainly if you come back in an hour, it will have moved at least a meter. I mean, I can't,
Yeah,
yeah,
but
tell you the
meter
exact speed, but yes, and
meter-ish.
sometimes, yeah. So sometimes I think, oh, this one's in a really obvious spot on the top of this rock. I'll come back later, and and I'll find it again. And then it's gone. So yes, so they do move.
Another comment from Annie saying, wonderful presentation, one outside our usual enlighteners. And it is quite different, but
Maybe we
very
can get
interesting.
one on astrophysics and galaxies sometime.
Yes.
Ah, yes, that's a whole
Wow.